Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Accad and Coca Report. I'm delighted to have with me Amy Doherty, who's a physician practicing in Wisconsin or hoping to practice in Wisconsin. She is now fearlessly battling corporate healthcare, and we're eager to find out what this is about. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Amy, before we get started, let me find out what your professional path has been. Since you began medical school and so forth.
Yeah, so I am a Midwesterner for most of my professional career. I'm from a northwest suburb of Chicago. I went to Des Moines University for medical school. I came back to Central Illinois for residency. I decided to do a fellowship program in Appalachia because did osteopathic training there with a luminary in the field. He went there because of the opioid crisis and trying to help with some of the pain issues that were
Hmm.
going on in this area. And so the osteopathic manipulation was very important for that. Came back and started working in Portage, Wisconsin, so near the state's capital, kind of central, 30 minutes from Madison in 2016. Then I worked for Divine Savior, the hospital, from 2016 until they were bought out from a larger corporation in 2020. And then when the larger corporation came in, I decided that wasn't for me. And the contract that we had signed with them had said that if we get bought out, then the non-compete doesn't apply anymore. So then I decided to leave at that point, start my own practice. And they decided that's not what they wanted. So I haven't been able to
Okay.
practice.
Okay. So we'll get into the non-compete clause and what that means. For the audience, we'll explain that in just a moment. But
Yes.
so you went back to Wisconsin after you finished your fellowship in osteopathic medicine, and
Yeah.
what kind of so what kind of practice was it with this hospital, Divine Savior Hospital?
It was your typically family practice type of scenario, treating chronic disease, hypertension, diabetes, all of that. Because of my special osteopathic training, that ended up taking over my practice a lot. So normally when you get good at it, kind of the word gets out and then it takes over a lot of your practice. So I was doing family medicine and that was a very large part of my practice was getting the osteopathic manipulation as well.
Okay. Is this the only game in town in terms of hospital, even perhaps even doctor offices, or are there other independent doctors? How big is the city or the catchment area, if you want to put it that way?
It's a town of 10,000 people, but there's smaller areas around. So there's no hospital in the Wisconsin Dells. That's a vacation area that's around. So those people would come in. There's a lot of smaller towns around that have like 3 to 5,000 people. And so they would have to travel half an hour to get to a hospital. And so although the town is 10,000 people, there's probably 40,000 people in the
Okay.
surrounding area that would use this institution because it's the closest one.
Okay. And are there doctors that do not work for that medicals or that have have hung their own shingle in the area, or is it mainly are they all associated with this hospital?
Wisconsin is a very hospital-based state. There's not a lot of smaller institutions. There's a lot of large hospital institutions. And the there have been 6 direct primary care practices that have opened in the state in like just in this area, more in the Madison area.
Hmm.
Um, but still around the state in the last calendar year. So although there are starting to be, there really aren't a lot of independent doctors. It's mostly a hospital owned kind of
Okay.
you go to the hospital or you don't, you
Right.
know.
So the community of in Portage, Wisconsin, would typically, if they needed medical care, they would go to a Divine Savior associated physician and
Yeah,
make an
there's
appointment and essentially establish a medical relationship there.
yes. And there's some outlying facilities like the University of Wisconsin Madison. They have an outreach facility
Hmm.
where it's like a smaller thing compared to their main campus. And then Dean SSM is another one where they have a smaller facility in the town, but it's the main hospital where if you're going to deliver a baby or have a surgery or something like that in
Okay.
town, this is where you would go.
Okay. So Divine Savior sounds like maybe it was, so there was a change in ownership. What kind of hospital, was it? I presume a Christian or a Catholic hospital?
Yes. So the Sisters of the Divine Savior are the original owners, and they started the hospital probably 150 years ago, because the Portage is in between the Wisconsin River and the Fox River. And so before highways, it was a much bigger town actually 150 years ago than it was today, because they didn't have highways. And so it's called Portage because it was between these two rivers. And it was a place where you could go from the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, via the Mississippi and all these rivers in this town.
I see.
So
Interesting.
it was originally started when it was a very large town. Back then, and the Sisters of the Divine Savior did it, and then it kind of evolved through the years such that even when it was sold, they were considered a sponsorship of that hospital.
Right. So obviously Catholic hospitals were, very, very common, very instrumental in the development of healthcare in the U.S. And
I think around the time of the pandemic, that's because I was reading into healthcare stuff. The last pandemic that we had, the Spanish flu, made it so that we needed hospitals for all of the sick and people from the pandemic. And that's when the Catholic hospitals really seemed to spring up, was when that need arose.
yeah, possibly, but I think even in the 19th century, there, as you mentioned, there were a few. People don't know the Mayo Clinic was started by same thing, an order of nuns.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they did. They Mayo, William Mayo, the father, was just a doc who had his solo practice, and the nuns, asked him to open a hospital with them, and the nuns were the nurses in that hospital, St. Mary's Hospital. I mean, it's still called St. Mary's, at the heart of the Mayo Clinic, and then, and that was in the 1870s, and what prompted that was there was a tornado that had devastated the town, and so there was a need for a hospital facility, and so that's how the arrangement started in the Mayo Clinic. But many other places it was just, as you said, religious orders that had opened hospitals, and so I know that over the years, especially since the 1960s, when Medicare and insurance companies and healthcare became sort of industrial and commercialized and whatnot, many of the religious organizations could no longer run it, themselves, and then they would either. There were two things, I think. A model that became more and more dominant is that a religious order would maintain maybe ownership of the facility, but would completely turn over the running of the hospital to a larger medical corporation. And so in the San Francisco area where I am, there's there are two hospitals that were formerly, actually no, there was one hospital that was formerly a Catholic hospital that has been run for many years, for decades, by a revolving door of corporate medicine entities. It used to be Catholic Healthcare West, sort of a big conglomeration, and then Dignity Healthcare, and now it's merged into something called Pure Spirit Healthcare, something like that. And essentially, and at that point, the involvement of the religious order is almost minimal. But there are some, and I used to work at another hospital in San Francisco that was run more directly by the religious order still. I mean, it's not that the nuns themselves were running the show, but they appointed a medical board, a governing board for their hospital.
Yeah.
And so they appointed that. And so which was Divine Savior, was it part of a sort of a big chain of Catholic hospitals, or was it still sort of pretty much managed by the
it was a small independent hospital that
Okay.
hadn't hooked up with any larger institutions. There was a governing board, and the nuns would sit on the board. So they were definitely a part of the kind of the running of the hospital up until just recently. And the reason that they wanted to sell off the hospital was because they're all aging, and kind of the main woman who had been in the main sister who had been in charge of helping with the running of the hospital is now in a nursing home in Milwaukee. And so they were kind of like, well, the sisters aren't joining the order. We're shrinking, we're getting older. So we have to sell off at this point, because we aren't able to sponsor the hospital as we once did just because the order is going to probably disappear with this generation.
Right. So they sold off, and the same thing happens to the hospital I just mentioned near San Francisco. It was Seton Hospital. It was run by the Daughters of Charity, and they sold off. They just couldn't run. They actually owned a handful of hospitals in California, and they just couldn't run them anymore. At the end, they were losing money, big time. In fact, I think they were losing money in large part because they tried to remain physician friendly for a long, long time, and they couldn't stay couldn't stay competitive in the cutthroat business of healthcare. So it sounds like that's what happened to that hospital, Divine Savior. So it was sold just recently, a couple of years ago,
Yeah,
to a larger at least medical healthcare entity called what's the name of it?
Aspirus.
Aspirus. Aspirus. Okay. And so things change. Is the name? Are they still called Divine Savior, or I mean, is the hospital still called? Does it still bear the name Divine Savior, or?
So that's a tricky question.
Okay,
If you
because
look at all,
I mentioned that because I'm reading. I mentioned this. There's your
it's important
little
for them.
wrangling with them, which we'll talk about in a minute, has was picked up by the press. So there was an article, and they keep mentioning Divine Savior, and they use the term Aspirus almost interchangeably.
Yes. So the lawsuit is with Divine Savior. And so it's important to them to still be called Divine Savior, because if they're still a corporate entity that wasn't purchased, then the non-compete still applies. So if you look at all their advertising, it says Aspirus Portage Clinic rather than Divine Savior, or if you look at all those things. But yeah, so it's kind of like one of those, if you have a pizza place down the road and it's Pizza Hut, and it's been that way for 150 years, and then it comes in and now it's a Papa John's, people are still going to call it Pizza Hut, right?
Right.
So yeah, everyone still calls it Divine Savior. And then sometimes they call themselves Divine Savior and sometimes they don't. But for the lawsuit, it's important
Depending on their on their intentions, right? How they
Yeah.
want to appear, because Divine Savior has some purchase in terms of goodwill, right?
Right.
The name at least. So what happens? I mean, what? First of all, how were your first few years with the old system, the old the old governing body in terms of what you were doing? Were you pretty happy? And
Yeah, I would say so. The whole reason I chose this location actually was because of the small independent hospital aspect. I'm very much into being able to just walk into the office of any administrator and say, hey, here's my issues, and have it solved. And that's really how it was. And a lot of the physicians who I interviewed with said the same thing, and it was true for them. Like our CEO is right there. We just go up the hallway and we talk to him and we're done, as opposed to, oh, there's a CEO and they're several, cities away and they have all these concerns and yours isn't one of them, type of a thing.
right, that's great. And that's pretty unusual. I mean, most family physicians nowadays who work with who are employed tend to be either I mean there can be a variety of complaints, but either they're overworked or they're understaffed or they're just a little cog in a. Did you have a sense that was kind of a unique and maybe privileged environment that you were part of?
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, we're always overworked in the sense that there's not enough doctors, so that's going to be the same no matter where you go. But as far as not feeling like a cog in a wheel, I did, and it was my first job out of residency, so I didn't have like a huge history, but I had enough of a history to know that I would much rather be in a small intimate situation as opposed to a corporate situation.
Right. And you were able to develop personal relationships with the patients. I mean, they were not. I mean, it's a small town, so not a huge turnover, I imagine.
Yes, and it's super sweet. So I would have people be like, hey, here's some eggs that my chicken laid, and bring them in as a gift, or oh, I quilted this for your baby, or it was just this you see people on the street, or you talk to people in the grocery store. It's a very tight-knit community, basically.
Right. That sounds great. Great. Were you, I mean, what was the I mean, let's talk about. I mean, I don't know if it's personal or not, but what was the pay? I mean, were you? Did you have pay? Were you on strict salary, or were there sort of productivity bonuses and that sort of thing at that time?
We started off on salary, and then you'd make production bonuses, and I always made mine, and felt like I was reimbursed appropriately for what I was doing. And that was never an issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then the hospital is sold, and what happens next in terms at least of your experience of your work experience?
So the hospital was sold in January of 2020, kind of. It really only took effect in March because they had to have the bishop in Madison sign off on it, and they had to have this religious person sign off on it. And so it wasn't your typical business deal because of all that Catholic stuff that went on. But they officially sold in March of 2020, and then they took some time to kind of start initiating things, and the changes didn't really start happening until 2021. But one of the first videos that we got that was like, oh, here's orientation to your new place, was that if you go to an Aspirus hospital in Portage, or you go to one in Wausau, or you go to any of our hospitals, all the care should be the same. We want to train everyone so that everything is the same all the time. And I heard that and I was like, I don't like this because, obviously I have specialized training. So I'm going to do things a little bit different based on my specialized training. I've taken a lot of interest in nutrition. My goal is really to kind of get people off of medication if I can, as opposed to just adding more and more medication. And so, we always complained about the typical doctor's office where, oh, it's a 15-minute appointment and your blood pressure is in control. Work with diet and exercise. I'm not going to explain to you how to do that, and here's a pill for that, right? That's kind of the opposite of the way that I wanted to practice. And so then it was like, everyone has to be the same. And I'm like, what are the chances that everyone being the same is going to be specific to the way that I want to do things? I don't know. And yeah. So that was one change. And then once the orientation stuff was done and they actually started getting into our benefits and our pay and things like that, all of that got worse too. They had matched our retirement half as much as they did previously. And they now, for the RVUs, or the relative value units, are making our production bonuses. Before, if you made over a certain mark, then you would get money. But now, if you didn't make that mark, they would take money away from you at the end of the quarter. And so I was learning about all this stuff when I was coming back from maternity leave, because I took maternity leave from November 2020 to February of 2021. All the changes occurred in January. So I emailed the administrator in charge of the physicians, and I said, what about if you're gone on maternity leave for 1 month of the quarter? What does that do to your RVUs? And the answer was, we don't know. I was like, how can you not know? Someone else has gone on maternity leave. And so there was just many things, as far as like, I wasn't sure of the financial security, and as time passed, all of us who had been easily getting bonuses before, for some reason, we weren't getting bonuses, even though we were working just as hard as we had before. So just all these things where there's something going on, and it's not good.
Sure. And then in terms of what you're mentioning just earlier about standardizing the care and whatnot, did they start pushing algorithms or restrict formularies, or restrict, or how did you have a chance to live through that, or was it just you could sense that was the intention and where things were going?
Yeah, that happened on every level. I had a medical assistant that I worked very closely with, and she was part of the way that I practice, as far as I also do low-level laser or photobiomodulation to help with musculoskeletal inflammatory conditions. And she knew how to set it up and could get things going, and knew our treatment program. And no other medical assistant knows how to do it, because it's mildly complex as far as setting all this up and knowing how to do it and remembering that from time to time. So they said, well, we don't want any medical assistants to get overtime, so we'll just pull her wherever we want. You just get whatever medical assistant, because it's all interchangeable. You're all just cogs in a wheel.
Right.
And then it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. I want the person who knows my program and knows all my patients, and my patients ask to speak to her because she knows what we do. And they said, well, you can apply and see if that's worth our while to let you have your person who knows your stuff going on. And so all of my patients kind of got peeved with that, because again, she knows the system and knows what we do and knows all of them. There were people that were fired that, this guy, I know him from high school. And it was just like, you could fire and hire people, and it didn't really matter as long as the bottom line was met, and like this person, I could pay them slightly more, or I could just lose that employee. And it's like, we'll just lose that employee is kind of what the,
right.
As far as patients, yeah, we would get emails like, this is the drug we want you to prescribe now. This is the drug we don't want you to prescribe now. So yes, there was a lot of stuff where it was just kind of
Right.
not what I
Right.
signed up for.
Right. Sure. And unfortunately, all too familiar with a lot of physicians, I'm sure. So then, what goes through your mind? I mean, this is quite recent. You're talking about 2021. Just so it's just last year.
So when I started realizing that things were kind of heading south, as
Mhm.
I returned from maternity leave in February of 2021, I Googled how to open your own practice.
Okay.
I
It's
never
funny because that had never been your intention.
no.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'd been happy doing what I was
Right.
doing. And
Right.
then when I saw all these things kind of like, well, here, let me tell you what's happening. I'm like, well, that's not what's happening. And then they're like, oh, it is. This is what's happening. It just talking to a brick wall. I was like, okay, so this is what corporate medicine is like, and corporate medicine is all over the state, and I'm not going to be doing
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
What do I do next? What are my other options? So I did. I just Googled, how do I open my own practice?
Okay.
And that's how I started.
Is
And
there a
then
blog that tells you how to do it?
like what I don't even so and then I just started reading books and contacting other people who had done the same thing and kind of figuring out like, okay, well, I think I can do this. This sounds like
Okay, so let's talk about this because we're gonna what you're planning to open is what's called a direct primary care practice, DPC.
Mhm.
And we had, I mean, it's been a while, but we had episodes and guests to talk about the DPC model. I think the audience would, mostly be familiar with it, but can you give us a little sort of a brief explanation of what kind of practice the DPC practice is?
Yes. So direct primary care involves a closer relationship, really prioritizing the doctor-patient relationship. So kind of going against everything that we just talked about as far as being a cog in a wheel. Like, hey, you're a patient and you can see any physician you want to, and just as long as we're extracting money from you, it's fine. With the DPC model, and see a doctor, see a PA, see an NP, it doesn't matter. If everyone's on the same drugs and everyone has the same protocol, then we can treat everyone the same.
Right.
What the direct primary care model is that each physician only has a certain number of patients that they can handle and be able to get them in same day, next day. So you're going to be avoiding ER visits. And in actuarial studies, you've reduced ER visits by 45% in people who have access to a DPC physician because of the fact they can call, text, email, and have their needs met right away, as opposed to kind of calling in, hoping that the nurse who took the message or the secretary who took the message gets it back to the doctor who has 50 other phone
Hmm.
notes on their desk and is seeing all these patients the whole day long. So you have a smaller number of patients, and then you end up having deeply discounted labs, imaging, medications, things like that. So I can get like 3 months of metformin for $1.80, so you don't even need insurance for that. Or I
Right.
can get,
Because you buy the medications wholesale and you
yes,
stock them in your office and you can dispense them.
yeah,
And that's authorized, I think, in most states allow physicians to do that, to essentially be a dispensing pharmacy.
yeah.
And you
So
can
then
pass
the
on the
idea,
savings to the patients, right?
exactly. And the idea is then you get rid of the insurance in the hospital telling you what you can do.
Hmm.
And so not only do you have the better communication between patient and doctor, because the doctor only has so many patients to care for, but you're getting rid of insurance and hospitals kind of driving up the cost on the side of hospitals, and then forcing you to need insurance, and then insurance decides whether they're going to pay for it or not, and this decides your care. So you kind of make it so it's like, hey, let's just get you affordable care, and then we decide what goes on as the doctor and patient. And the way that you're able to do that is it's almost like a health share co-op. So you pay a low monthly fee, about often it's somewhere between $60 and $100 depending on where you're living and the cost of living and things like
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
per month for an adult, and anywhere between 10 and or 10 to 30 to 50 for a kid, again depending on if you're a pediatric specialty, you might charge more to see kids because that's again your specialty. But again, it's like this low monthly fee for your family, and then you don't pay for office visits. And then if something surprising comes up, like, oh, I got an infection, or oh, I need a physical, you don't pay for those things. That's all part of your subscription fee.
Right, right. And that's terrific. And it's I think it's taken off. I mean, it's been 10 years in the making or so, since people have started to work with, design this way of doing medicine with some pioneers who have done it and have done it very, very well, and now are teaching others how to do it. So I suspect that when you Googled how to, I mean, is that how you came across DPC, or did you know about DPC from your training, or had you heard about it before?
Yeah, I had no idea that DPC existed, and I might have done it sooner if I had known about it. But I Googled, when I Googled it, I found Paul Thomas's book about direct primary care. I found other books, I found other leaders, and just started reading everything I could about it.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, Paul Thomas is a big DPC doctor, I think in Detroit, the Detroit area, and he's notorious for his skill at sort of spreading the gospel on DPC and teaching people how to do it and encouraging other doctors to do it. That's great. So you learn about that model, and we're talking what it's March 2021, April 2021. You're thinking that that's what you're going to do. When do you know exactly when you decided that was it, or?
It was October of 2021.
Okay.
Got one of those emails that was like, "This is how you're going to practice," and then I was like, "I'm done now."
Okay.
So and so I decided to resign at that point. And up to that point, even before I knew I wanted to do DPC or go out on my own, my husband and I had been planning the last 5 years to be independent, right? So having that big medical school debt is something that really ties you down.
Mm-hmm.
So we had, bought a tiny home and flipped it, and we're ready to sell it at the peak of the real estate market. And we had tried to set ourselves up to be independent and to not need that big hospital check, in order to make our lives run. So we had set ourselves up ahead of time. I had this dream. We're like, okay, let's do this. Resigned in October. Last day at work was December 31st of 2021. And then my plan was to open my practice in January of 2022.
Okay. And what happened next?
So the plan was to, so the other thing about my practice is, because of all my special training, I have a lot of people who say, I just can't go to another doctor at this point because people can't do what you do. And I'm like, right, they can't, because I have special training for that. So whenever I leave an area, it's very difficult because of the fact that I know that they just can't go anywhere else. And I decided to stay in the area because of what I mentioned before, how, that non-compete clause shouldn't apply because of the fact that the hospital was bought out. The whole reason I was having issues.
Yeah, so let's actually clarify that. So were you aware of such a thing as a non-compete clause? Or, I mean, I can't remember when I signed my first job. I don't even know that I even, that I was aware that there were non-compete clauses in the contract, or what these things are. So just to be clear, a non-compete clause, I mean, essentially it's self-descriptive, but it's a clause in a contract that you have, with when you work as a physician employee or partner with a medical group or whatever, that if you leave the group, then you cannot essentially take your patients with you and stay in the same area. You have to either practice remotely, outside of a, I don't know, 40-mile radius, whatever the specifics are, but that you can't really stay in the same area, and therefore
it treats patients
right, yeah. Exactly. It treats patients as property, right? Your patients cannot pick their own doctors, right? It forces the patients to find another doctor if you decide to leave the practice.
Rather than patients being human beings with thoughts and emotions and relationships,
right,
they are something that you can extract money from. And if you're going to extract money from these people, then now you can't act like the property of the hospital as your property.
Amazing. So were you aware of that of the non-compete clause being part of your contract that you had signed with Divine Savior 5 years before?
I was, and my understanding was that it was pretty common thing, and it has become more common to sign those, especially in the last 10 years, as medicine becomes more and more corporate, and there's less and less small private doctors to kind of add the humanistic quality to medicine. I know I've heard of some doctors saying that, I was just going to walk away if they didn't take that non-compete out. But I thought that with the non-compete that we had, where, hey, I'm in a small independent hospital, and it says if we get bought out that this doesn't apply anymore, that seemed to be an okay non-compete to me at the time.
I see. So, just to be clear, the clause in your contract said that if the, I mean, it was a contract with a specific entity, and then it was bought out. So presumably, that non-compete clause was no longer enforceable, or it was essentially made void by the change in ownership.
Yeah,
That's your understanding of what.
that's how I read it, and that's how ran it by multiple lawyers, and they all said, yeah, that's what it looks like.
Okay. Okay.
You know.
Okay. Okay. So you submit your resignation, and did you take a lease on a space? I mean, you had picked a space for your new practice, and
I bought an office.
you bought an office. Okay.
Yeah, there was an office that was built in 1957 by an orthopedic physician in town. And then his son had been a family practice doctor and then opened there and practiced out of the office. And when I bought it, it's a vacant building, just another, Main Street vacant building in our town. And I was like, okay, I'll reopen a doctor's office in a doctor's office. That sounds good, right?
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful building. It's there's on the frame outside, it has the date 1957 stamped with the architect and the designer. And they say that when they did that, it's because they really liked how the building turned out, basically. And so it's a river town that I live in. And the previous owner said that whenever if the town floods, which it does like every 10 years or something pretty badly, it'll like take cars down the street. She's like, yeah, we didn't get any water in here. So there's like this solid doctor's office in downtown that was vacant.
Okay. Okay. Terrific. So you signed. I mean, you bought the piece, and then did you tell your patients you were leaving, or how did that work? Or
yeah, so a lot of them come in just like sobbing when they found out that I was leaving. Like, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I'm staying in town. Go to my website. I don't really have time to talk about it during office visits, obviously, because the reason that you don't have a lot of time in office visits. So I'm like, I have a website you can set up. You can look there for more information, but we'll keep this office visit more to what it is that you came in for. And then if you want to find out more, it's there. You can find it. Don't worry about it. But we'll talk about. I wanted to have like resources available, just so that I could get through my day, but also have like, the gazillion people who are very upset to be like, okay, here's your resource you can go to.
So January 6th, you open your practice, and when I opened my practice, it was April 1st, April Fool's Day. I opened my direct care practice, and I had one phone call from a patient from my previous practice who called me, and that was several miles away, so I didn't expect anybody I didn't expect the phone to ring, but I had one patient sign up. How was it for you, or when you opened up?
Well, we do have social media nowadays,
right?
And so there was just a lot of happiness. There's a lot of excitement. People were like, oh, hey, we're getting small business, where that's an issue for our town, is getting small business downtown. We're getting, my doctor isn't leaving. And that was the other thing, is that physicians come and go, right, because of these non-competes. And so during my tenure, like a lot of times I'd have people come to their physicals and they're like, you're not leaving, are you? You're not leaving, are you? And right. Each time I would assure them that I wasn't. And then when I had that, when I was on my way out, I was like, just go to my website. It's like, whatever, So there was a lot of excitement. And then I was planning on having a soft opening in January, just to have like not a lot of people sign up, and then really get things going.
Sure.
In February. And so I signed up 18 patients on January 26th, which that was the opening day. Or no, January 21st was the opening day. I signed up 18 patients. And then immediately I was informed that there was a lawsuit that just came down from the hospital.
Okay.
And they were saying that, the non-compete still applies because the hospital was acquired by an affiliation instead of an asset sale or merger, and basically just like playing with the legalese of trying to say that the non-compete does still apply. They issued a restraining order to stop me from practicing. So then that put a lot of patients into a pinch, and they they may have been due for medications, or they may have needed a doctor's care, basically. And they timed it, even though they knew that I was opening my practice, they timed it for the day that I was officially signing up patients, to kind of put these people in a spin. It almost seems like, who knows why that seems silly to do that. Why would you not do the lawsuit ahead of time if you knew it was happening, and just wait for the day that I was trying to open?
Right, because I mean, to be clear, when you submitted your resignation a month
No.
before, right? A
Yeah.
month before, and 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 they must have, I mean, if they could have told you right then and then, right there and then, too, that.
So I had
Um,
one, and she emailed me and she said I needed refills on my meds, and I'm like, I'm trying to figure out my life right now because of this lawsuit. And then she said, well, I talked to the hospital that you worked for, and they said I had to come in for an appointment, but I don't have insurance with them anymore. So she had to go in and she had to pay hundreds of dollars for an appointment that she was basically blackmailed into going in, because they wouldn't refill her meds, and I couldn't because of the situation that they put me in,
right. Right. So, I mean, what was it? You had what is it? I forgot what's the name of the person that comes and serves you the paper for the lawsuit. Somebody knocked on your door and said, "Here, open this envelope," or how did you find out that?
I'd already gotten a lawyer at that point, because when I
Okay.
was planning on leaving and starting my practice, I had him kind of communicate with them like, hey, this non-compete doesn't apply. And so he alerted me, because they sent
Okay.
the petition through
Okay.
to him.
Okay. And so it was, and that means, I mean, they had restraining, meaning they found a judge to agree to issue a restraining order on you, and therefore there was no legal way that you could start practice at that point.
Yeah, so they took a judge out of retirement, to issue the restraining order, and normally you would have a time when you could defend against it that's very close to the time that the restraining order was issued.
Okay.
So they took a judge out of retirement to do this, and there was no setup for when is it going to be defended against.
Wow, you can take a judge out of I mean, is it a county judge, or what at what level of, or state, or what's the administrative level of,
It's
or
it's a I believe it's a
administrative
county
judge, or
level. Yeah. So then they did that, and then we weren't sure when we were going to defend against it, and that was January 21st, and it is currently March 29th, and I still have not been able to defend against this restraining order.
wow. Wow. So I mean, enlighten me, because I know nothing about this procedure. What's so the next step is to defend against it, but then you need to have a court date.
Yeah, so we're doing something called a summary judgment, which basically is something that you do where you say you don't have a case here. The facts are obvious.
Okay.
And so there's going to be out of court arguments throughout the month of April. And then in May, there's going to be a break because of a different lawsuit that's going on that's criminal. And so criminal takes precedence over civil cases. And then I will finally have a chance to actually speak in court on May 27th. So it's going to be 5 months after the original issue. Meanwhile, I have an office that was sitting empty until I started doing some things to fix that.
Right. Right. No,
Not medicine, but other things to help the health of the community. And I may have to, pay a mortgage in one spot and rent it another if I want to practice.
That's terrible. And so, but there's no appeal. I mean, you can't say. I mean, right? I mean, you have no choice, right? You have to wait until that court date takes place.
Yes.
And then you're hoping that the judge will view it your way, sort of.
Yes.
Okay.
And they can do whatever they want, and then I'm stopped from, doing anything during this 5-month period.
Right.
Even though I'm the defendant, and
Right.
normally
Right.
defendant
Right.
have to.
That's I mean that's horrible, but you seem very well composed, and you seem to have taken it in stride. So I see that. So I found out about it. There was an article shared on social media in the DPC world about this. So the press got wind of this and wrote a little piece on what's going on, essentially summarizing what you've just said.
Yes.
Um, how did they get wind of it, or were you able to? Do you have somebody? And I mean, it always helps if you know somebody who works for the local newspaper or whatnot. Um,
Well, yeah, the whole community is very unhappy with this situation. We need more doctors in this
I
community.
imagine, right.
Yeah.
It seems sort of vindictive and gratuitous and mean spirited, and
Well, we just came off of COVID, like, oh,
right.
with the healthcare workers are the heroes until you're not on our payroll, and now you're not anymore. There's we've needed.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely right. We've seen that also in respect with respect to healthcare workers who were, who didn't want to get vaccinated or didn't want to get boosted. So they were the heroes at the beginning, and then even if they had been infected with COVID, they would, they'd be fired if they refused the mandates, because all of a sudden you're not playing by our rules here. And
That's a whole nother story.
it's a whole other story, yes. But but so the community is obviously upset, and for good reasons. A lot of patients who I imagine had expressed an intention to follow you
Mhm.
in this new practice.
Yeah, especially those ones who just really can't get care anywhere else. There's nobody. There's really only a couple of physicians in the state that have my fellowship training. So if you're going to a doctor and they're getting you better, and you've had back pain for 25 years and we're thinking about quitting your job because you can't do it anymore, and then you've gone to physical therapy and you've done everything, and you finally meet a doctor, and the first office visit your pain is 60% gone, and then the next couple most of your pain is gone. I hope that guy that I treated is okay, but he's not going to be able to find anyone to help him get back to work if he has an exacerbation, because he's searched for 25 years and hasn't found anyone. So there's a lot of just public health issues as far as people who really can't get care any other way.
Right,
So.
right. Now, do you get a sense? So, in this new capacity as a DPC doctor, you're asking patients to pay for your services, whereas in the old system, it would be covered presumably by their. Are these the folks there mostly? They mostly have some kind of insurance.
Yes.
Okay, so they mostly have insurance. So now they have to pay you, which at one level it seems that would seem to be like a minor competition to the main hospitals, because not everybody's going to be able to afford to pay a DPC fee, modest as it may be.
Not just that, but some people don't have insurance. So the hospital that I worked for, I'm working for a free clinic right now, because that way they can't, if I'm not making an income from what I do, then they can't come after me, basically.
Interesting.
So
So
as
interesting that the non-compete clause depends on on whether you make money or not, as
isn't
opposed
that
to
interesting?
right, right.
So
Okay,
I've been working for their free clinic partly to help a lot of these people who I really care about.
right.
It's like, yes, it's, yeah, you want to make a living doing something you love, and I love what I do. So I was a bit lost not being
But
able
just to be clear, uninsured patients, were you seeing uninsured patients in your the
No.
previous? No, you're not. Okay,
Yeah, and so if you have to pay, $900 a month for an insurance premium, or you can get
right.
primary care, obviously we always recommend that people have wraparound disaster insurance no matter what. But if you can pay $65 a month to have your primary care taken care of, it really is going to help out a lot of the under and uninsured in our community.
Right,
And
right. Certainly. DPC is very attractive for uninsured patients to at least have a doctor, even if it's not insurance. They at least have a
very
doctor.
high quality care.
Right. Um, which means that you were not going to, compete. You were not going to take that many patients out of Aspirus, Divine Savior.
And the story that we're told is that the primary care is just a referral service for them to make money anyway.
That's what it is. In fact, that's what it is. So I think that's what you're not competing on the number of patients that you're going to take away from them, but you're competing on the resources that you're going to provide. Meaning, I suspect that that's partly why they feel threatened by you, is because you're going to, in your capacity as a primary care physician, you don't use labs and X-rays and MRIs and as liberally as you would if you were part of a system, because you have more time to evaluate conditions. You're cost sensitive, right? You pay attention to how much it's going to cost to your patients, and those tend to be sort of what do they call them? They call revenue centers for the hospital, right? The radiology department is a revenue center, and that sort of thing. Um, and so I wonder. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you know, if you have an inkling, but I wonder if it's precisely because you chose this particular model that they felt particularly threatened, because um, I don't know. Who knows? Right? Exactly. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
So you're seeing patients for free in a free clinic in Portage?
Yes, I'm seeing them for free in a free clinic.
Okay.
And what I've heard from, so the free clinic was started by Dr. Doyle, and she's a pediatrician and she's an amazing woman. She was in med school in the 1970s. And she talked about when she was in med school in the 1970s, how it just wasn't a woman's world at that point. So she had, if she went to surgery, she had to wear a dress. It had to be a surgical dress instead of scrubs. Or if she went on a rotation, they didn't have a spot for women. So she had to find housing for herself, and the male students didn't have to do that. Or,
Right.
On and on. Just so she's had a really pioneer, I'm just going to make this happen type of life. And she's the woman who started the free clinic in our town for basically retired doctors go there and help the under or uninsured in our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so she started it, and then they said, how can we help you? Because, the whole practice model that you're doing is going to help these patients that we're trying to help.
Right.
So I've been going there, and in the 10 years that they've been open, they've had almost 17,000 patient contacts, and that's being open a half day per week. They're only open Wednesday mornings in town. But despite that, among just a couple doctors, they've seen, over like that many patients because there's just that many under and uninsured in our community that would, that can't go to the hospital, they can't afford it. So they would greatly benefit from having a model like I have, where they can get in and get low cost labs and imaging and everything.
Sure. That's could you? I mean, I guess it would complicate things. I mean, could you open your practice and not charge anything? I mean, could you have your own free clinic for with an understanding that it will change once the legal situation is clarified? I guess I mean I can see why it's not a good idea, because if the judgment doesn't go your way, then it's you're caught in between and so forth, and it's.
I've got like a baby and a husband, so they'll need some of my time too.
Right, sure, you deserve it too. To go back to the non-compete clause, so you're fighting it on the specifics of the contract that you had signed, which is great, and I hope that you get a summary judgment. But a couple of years ago, we had on the show Dr. Marcelo Hockman, who's a physician in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina, and he has spearheaded efforts with the legislature in South Carolina to try to actually make non-compete clauses illegal. Because, as you said, it's exactly right. I mean, it assumes that patients are property, and that they're treated that way. And we had a conversation, and we were talking about the enforceability of non-compete clauses in general. So, have you thought about fighting it? I mean, if the judgment doesn't turn out your way, I mean, what would you have a recourse to fight it another way?
In the summary judgment, we're also talking about how the non-compete is unenforceable. So that's part of what we're already saying. If I was to lose the summary judgment, then you'd really have to decide like how much you want to spend on legal fees at that point, partly because of the fact that 25% of the non-compete has already been in their favor before,
Because the term of the non-compete clause is 2 years, which is kind of a standard term, right?
And by the time we started a trial on it, the non-compete would already be up. Is kind of the
right. I understand.
Would you want to go that route? I've had some DPC docs that are like, yes, take this to the Supreme Court. We have to get non-competes ruled unconstitutional. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it as far as as far as doing that. I am doing things actually to get rid of non-compete clauses, just like the guy in South Carolina. So I'll have to talk to him about that. But I'm starting to meet with people in the Wisconsin Assembly starting this next month about how do we get a bill on the floor about getting rid of non-competes, because of the fact that that idea that patients are property and not living beings that have decision making. I mean, one of the reasons why the American healthcare system is the most expensive by far in the world, with some of the worst outcomes. Well, if that's how we view patients, that there's something you extract money from in our property,
Exactly. Right.
what's the natural consequence of that?
Right.
You know? And so the more being in this position and having this lens, it's become very apparent to me that we do need to get rid of non-competes if we want to start improving the American healthcare system. It seems like a very important part of that. I spoke to my cousins who live in Norway, who are doctors, and I said, do you guys have non-competes there? And, you know, Norway is considered one of the best healthcare systems in the world. And they have cost controls on medications and things like that. And they were like, wait, what do you have there? What is it called? A non-compete? That sounds crazy. Let me ask around. No, we don't have anything like that here. Why would you have something like that in healthcare?
Right. No, it is crazy. It's terrible. I mean, and you're absolutely right. And there are many different ways that non-compete, that there's lack of competition. We also had a physician on the show, maybe I think 3 years ago, who wanted to open an MRI center. He was not even a radiologist himself, but he was in an area where he thought, you know, he could invest and have an MRI and provide MRIs at, you know, low cost, you know, on a cash basis, you know, stay outside of insurance, low cost and whatnot. And he was shut down so he ended up suing the state. I think it was in North Carolina. He ended up suing the state of North Carolina, because in many states there are called CON laws, CON, Certificate of Need laws, where you can't really open a healthcare facility unless you demonstrate that there's a need, right? And of course, these Certificate of Need laws are extremely bureaucratic, right? I mean, the way you demonstrate a need is extremely complicated, and it's all in the favor of, you know, big box medicine that's, you know, trying to protect its turf. And so the hospital system.
Crazy. Look at all these things that drive our healthcare costs up.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I don't know. You know, it's been 3 years, so I don't know what the status of his legal action is. It'd be good to revisit with him what's happened. But he couldn't open he couldn't open a facility that would provide cheaper care, because because quote unquote he had to demonstrate that there's a need for cheaper care.
Oh.
It's crazy. So at many different levels, this is a really screwed up healthcare system. But I think DPC is definitely part of the solution, and so I commend you for choosing that route. And I want to actually, I looked at your website, which is still up. I mean, I think, you know, it says joins, you know, it's inviting people to sign up and stay abreast, just in case things turn in your favor, they can sign up. But it's a very nice website. I mean, it's human, right? I mean, it's got a beautiful touch. It's very personal, and you get a sense of who you are as a person, and that's how it should be. You look at the average website for medical institutions. I mean, they're awful. They're so drab. They're all the same. They have these these stock photos, right? Stock photos of happy nurses and happy patients that are completely unrealistic. And so I wish you very well. Amy, anything else you wanna say before we close?
No, I think that's it. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's been very nice talking to you.
Yeah, where can people? So, do you have any social media presence?
I do. So Amy Doherty, spelled Doherty, is a public profile that I have on Facebook.
On Facebook, okay.
Yeah.
I'll have a link to the show notes. I mean, a link in the show notes to that, and a link to the article that you know, chronicles your misadventure here. We wish you very well. And maybe I'll have a few links to some episodes that we've had on related topics about non-compete clauses, about the DPC model, and so forth.
Perfect.
Amy, thank you very much.